Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you all for joining us this afternoon. My name is Jeanne Shaheen. I am the ranking member of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. With me this afternoon are Brian Schatz, who is the ranking member of the Senate SFOP's Appropriations Subcommittee, and Chuck Schumer, who is the Democratic leader in the Senate. Senator Schumer would like to say a few words before we officially begin. This is not going to be a regular hearing. It's more a roundtable, so hopefully that offers an opportunity for us to engage more with some of the folks who are here to give us statements, and we expect that there will be a number of senators who will come in and out during the next hour or so, and hopefully we will get a chance for each of them to be able to ask their questions. So, Senator Schumer, I'm going to ask you to go ahead with your minute, and then we'll officially open the meeting.
Hi, thank you. I want to thank Senator Shaheen and the Democratic members of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee for holding this, our first spotlight hearing. This one's more of a roundtable, but the purpose, and we're going to have many of these throughout the committees, is to bring to light what is really happening. Unfortunately, our Republican colleagues will not be doing that, and so we are having these types of spotlight hearings to make sure that that happens. Here with USAID, we've seen and we'll get much more evidence how our farmers are being hurt, how it weakens our position with China, and a MEDAC's approach to eliminating USAID makes no sense whatsoever. But these hearings will help bring that to light. And is our belief, as these hearings go forward, the spotlight hearings throughout our many committees, that the American people will own more and more and more of the harm that DOGE and this administration is doing to everyday Americans. So with that, I want to thank Senator Shaheen, thank Senator Schatz, combined if they were one person. Thanks Senator Kim, and the SFRC Democrats do a great job, and this is another example. But there will be many more of these hearings. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Schumer. And the way this will work, I will read a brief opening statement. Then I will introduce each of our panelists, ask them to do about 3 minutes of remarks, and then we will open it up for Q&A. I will just point out for clarity, it isn't just the Democrats on the Senate Foreign Relations Committee that are holding this hearing. We did invite all of the Republican members of the committee as well as a number of our Republican colleagues. It's not clear to me who will show up, but they were invited. So again, thank you for joining us today to discuss the impact of the foreign aid freeze by the Trump administration and the attempt by Elon Musk and his Doge boys to dismantle the U.S. Agency for International Development. I want to start off by underlining what I think is a very important point. These efforts to undermine our foreign assistance are a gift to America's adversaries. You can see that in the headlines from around the world. As one article from the University of Melbourne in Australia read, and I quote, "In freezing foreign aid, the U.S. leaves people to die and allows China to come to the rescue." Another had a more specific example. Quote, "Amid the funding freeze by the United States Agency for International Development, China has stepped in with a $4.4 million grant to support Cambodia's demining operations." But it's not just China that's happy. An AP News headline read, "Iran praises U.S. for cutting foreign aid funding." And then, of course, there's Russia. When Putin started to consolidate power and crack down on opposition parties in 2012, one of the first things he did was to expel USAID from Russia. So it's no surprise that former Russian President Medvedev said cutting USAID was a smart move by Elon Musk. Another Kremlin propagandist on state-owned TV said the demise of USAID has energized people inside Russia. He said Russia should take advantage of this opportunity because, quote, "foreign assistance should be part of our," meaning Russia's, foreign policy. It could be a phenomenal lever. Well, that's true. Foreign assistance and USAID efforts in particular are a phenomenal lever. They are critical to our national security interests. They protect us from deadly diseases like Ebola or Marburg or bird flu. They stabilize societies and give people in places like Guatemala or Haiti incentives to stay home and to not migrate to our borders. These programs also fight against the radicalization of vulnerable youth by terror groups like ISIS in Syria, a group that has inspired strikes here in the United States. Now, are there improvements that we should be looking at USAID? Of course there are. I'm all for making government more efficient and effective. I'm all for ensuring that our tax dollars go to the right place. And I've always been willing to work across the aisle with my colleagues. I'm sure everyone here would echo those sentiments. We're willing to work together to keep our country safe. But that is not what this is. Feeding USAID into the wood chipper, as Elon Musk has said, that's a disaster. It means cutting over 100,000 U.S. jobs, farmers, shippers, logistics management, pharmaceutical manufacturing. It means American small businesses will lose out on nearly $1 billion in contracts this year. I heard from a small business, a federal contractor based in Concord, New Hampshire, whose work includes counterterrorism actions in North Africa. His contract was just put on hold. The administration says it has a waiver process, but they're dismantling infrastructure. They're firing people. Billions of dollars in contracts are being terminated as we speak, with no regard for our national safety. There's been no consultation with DOD or the intelligence community, no consideration for whether China is gaining influence in a given country. And taken together, this seems like illegal impoundment. It does not make us safer, it does not make us more secure, and it does not make us more prosperous. And it definitely does not put Americans first. It increases the chances of terror attacks, it increases the number of people coming to our borders, it leaves us vulnerable to deadly diseases, and it gives our most powerful adversaries an opening to exploit. These are serious risks. Our foreign aid is less than 1% of the overall budget, and these USAID programs are a small fraction of that. I hope my Republican colleagues will overcome their fears of Elon Musk and join us in saying no, and I look forward to today's discussion. Before we get started, let me introduce those who are here to share their statements with us. Sarah Charles is the former assistant to the administrator of USAID's Bureau for Humanitarian Assistance, where she led responses to the global food security crisis, to Russia's invasion of Ukraine, and conflicts in Sudan and the Horn of Africa, just to name a few. Jeremy Konyndyk is the president of Refugees International and a former senior official at USAID, where he led responses to COVID-19 and MPOX during the Biden administration, and previously directed USAID's Office of U.S. Foreign Disaster Assistance. Cindy Dyer is the former U.S. Ambassador at Large for the State Department's Office to Monitor and Combat Trafficking in Persons. She's also served as the Director of the Office on Violence Against Women during the second Bush administration and as the Vice President on Human Rights at Vital Voices. And last but not least, of course, is Bruce Schwarz, who is the former Deputy Assistant Attorney General and Counselor for International Affairs at the U.S. Department of Justice. He's played a key part in international negotiations and coordination of assistance, extraditions, and transborder criminal cases. So again, thank you all for being here. We really appreciate your willingness to join us and both your statements and answering questions. And let me just recognize we have Senator Rosen, Senator Kim, Senator Klobuchar, Senator Kelly, in addition to Senator Schatz and Senator Van Hollen. So thank you all for joining us. And I will ask you to begin, Bruce.
Well, thank you, Senator. If there is one message that I could deliver to American citizens and American taxpayers, it is this. Foreign assistance protects you, it protects your families, it protects America. Foreign assistance, as you suggest, Senator, allows us to confront terrorism, transnational crime, pandemics, regional instability, and numerous other threats overseas, standing shoulder to shoulder with our friends and allies before these threats reach our shores. And it's important to recognize that there has always been bilateral, bipartisan consensus on this issue. In my 25 years at the Department of Justice working on these issues, I had occasion to brief and testify on this issue on numerous occasions before Congress. And strikingly, there was always agreement that foreign assistance is a key law enforcement and national security tool. Senator Graham aptly summarized this in a hearing on USAID just a few years ago, in which he said that USAID is a very valuable part of our national security strategy. He observed that it's national security in another form, and he observed that USAID personnel and contractors deploy to some of the most dangerous places on earth and put their lives at risk in doing so. But it's not just USAID, as you suggest, Senator, that is at issue here. Because, of course, Congress also appropriates, also gives to State Department foreign assistance funds that are critical to the national security of the United States. And as you know, but the American people should know, those funds go to, among other things, our law enforcement and national security partners overseas. It's those funds that make possible the fight against narcotics cartels that are bringing fentanyl and other deadly narcotics into this country. And they do that by, among other things, funding the DEA's and other U.S. law enforcement's vetted teams, their most important partners. It also funds the Department of Justice prosecutors that are deployed overseas to work with their counterparts to investigate and prosecute these crimes, again, before they get here. And the same is true with regard to our counterterrorism cooperation. With these funds that Congress has appropriated, we are able to place Department of Justice prosecutors to work on prosecuting terrorists in other countries before they travel here, and to strengthen the inspections at borders and airports against terrorists and weapons of mass destruction. And the examples could be multiplied. It includes the cybercrime we do overseas, again, funded through foreign assistance that allows us to go after the groups that target American families for elder fraud crimes or sextortion. And as we'll hear more today from other members of the panel, it involves the funding for our work against trafficking groups, human trafficking groups, and human smuggling groups. And I will also just conclude, again, making your point, Senator, even before we had the issues here involving USAID and the funding freeze, China was moving, in particular, strongly into this space. China is determined to become the law enforcement partner of choice rather than the United States, and not being able to engage in this assistance further isolates the United States. In short, then, in conclusion, Congress appropriates these funds to protect the United States, American citizens, their families, and it's essential to our safety that these funds be used for that purpose. Thank you, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Cindy.
Thank you so much for having us, and thank you for your advocacy and leadership. I think it's important to note that even an issue as bipartisan as trafficking in persons is being impacted by these cuts and these executive orders. The Trafficking Victims Protection Act has been enshrined in our legislation for more than 25 years, and it has been an important focus of every administration, and it is something that the American people care about. Obviously, these cuts to funding that are given by the Trafficking in Persons Office and INL and other State Department offices are not only impacting trafficking victims and individuals vulnerable to trafficking who live in other countries where our programs occur, but these cuts are also negatively impacting Americans, American workers, and American businesses. And I'd like to give a few specific examples. Number one, these cuts and executive orders are making Americans less safe in our own country. When you reduce aid to fragile, struggling countries, making those countries less able to provide safety and security and justice for their own citizens, that will increase migration. When you simultaneously remove avenues for legal migration, migrants will have to turn to smugglers in order to leave. And they will leave. You cannot stop the determination and the will to live. They will have to, though, contact with a human smuggler, which will increase trafficking. Migrants will not be able to pay the smugglers for the cost, which will be higher to enter the United States. And so when they inevitably get here, they will be here with debt bondage, and they will have to pay the smuggler back, and they will have to do whatever the smuggler says, which increasingly means engaging in forced criminality here in the United States. Migrants are forced to repay these debts by selling drugs, manufacturing drugs, transferring drugs, engaging in murder, engaging in theft, forced begging. These activities in the U.S. make Americans less safe and secure. These cuts also make American workers and American companies less prosperous. American dollars through these foreign aid grants were used to make other countries treat their workers fairly. But these grants are being terminated. For example, USAID just abruptly terminated the Global Labor Program, which allows Americans' unions through the Solidarity Center and the AFL-CIO to help other countries strengthen worker protection and rights. These programs obviously benefit those foreign workers, but they also directly benefit American companies who cannot compete against companies that do not pay their workers. If companies in Vietnam or India do not pay the people who catch and process their shrimp, how can shrimpers in Texas and Louisiana keep their family businesses alive? If ranchers in Brazil who rely on forced labor, often from Afro, Brazilian, and indigenous populations, their beef will be more competitively priced in the global market than U.S. ranchers who have to pay their workers. These programs are also protecting American assets. My entire office's last year programs in East Asia and in South and Central Asia were focused on addressing online scam operations that used trafficking victims to defraud Americans of millions of dollars. Frequently, these were older Americans who lost their life savings. This past year, my office collaborated with Treasury and other agencies as the result of these programs to obtain the very first global Magnitsky sanctions against a Cambodian tycoon who was using his vast resources to defraud folks. And once Americans lose that money is gone forever. These are just a few examples of how these edicts do exactly the opposite of what Trump and the administration say. They are making Americans less safe, less prosperous, and less secure. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Jeremy.
Thank you, Senator Shaheen, for convening this, and thank you. An amazing turnout of all of you today. It really is meaningful and inspiring to those of us in the foreign aid community to see such support. So we deeply appreciate it. I want to start with a short anecdote from when I served at USAID during the Biden administration. So I joined at the very beginning in 2021 to lead global COVID-19 efforts. And at that time, China was conducting coercive vaccine diplomacy across the world to expand their global influence. China would approach countries. They would make vaccines available in modest volumes at an extreme markup and on extortionate political terms, demanding often breaking off of relations with Taiwan and economic concessions in order to be allowed to purchase Chinese vaccines. However, as the U.S. scaled up our global vaccination program, we took a different approach, and we were able to offer countries a better deal. We gave better quality vaccines, free of charge, in solidarity with them because we were working with them to beat the pandemic. And that meant countries no longer had to take these coercive terms from China. It gave them greater freedom from Chinese influence, and it brought them closer into an American orbit. In my view, this is one microcosm of what has long made U.S. foreign assistance unique, a bedrock notion dating back to the founding of USAID under John F. Kennedy, that the U.S. can do well by doing good, that we can deliver our foreign aid in a way that serves both our national interests and aligns with American values. And we are now at risk of losing that. USAID has been the target of a concerted campaign of disinformation led by Elon Musk and amplified by the President of the United States. They have deployed a fire hose of falsehoods to slander an agency whose mission is fundamental to advancing America's interests in the world, as Bruce talked about earlier. And they have slandered the incredible men and women who have served their country through USAID for many years, often at considerable sacrifice to themselves and their families. I and many others would support a good faith review of U.S. foreign aid structures. It's been years since we had a comprehensive one, and it would be important. But we should be clear: this is not that. This is not what this is. This is an attempt to permanently and irrevocably dismantle decades of U.S. leadership in foreign assistance and decades of U.S. soft power investments. It's being conducted unlawfully, operating outside of any guardrails and outside of congressional oversight. Rather than conducting an actual review, the administration is simply moving forward with purging USAID's workforce, with ending many partnerships that USAID has invested in with organizations over, in some cases, years and decades, all with no consultation, no rationale for what is being cut. And this has resulted in devastating human impacts around the world, disruption to global HIV programs, an inability to respond to an ongoing Ebola outbreak currently in Uganda, huge and devastating impact in Darfur amidst a famine in Sudan. And if this continues in this way, it will destroy some of the crown jewels of U.S. foreign policy, including the PEPFAR HIV program, the famous DART humanitarian assistance teams, which I'm sure Sarah will talk more about, that have led our responses in the past to famines, earthquakes, and Ebola, but which currently would struggle to even get off the ground under these conditions. This destruction will harm U.S. national security, and it will harm the safety and welfare of millions around the world. And bottom line, when we pull back programs that we've run for decades, that people have known that they can rely on, it makes us look like an unreliable and erratic partner, and it advantages our rivals around the world in all the ways, Senator Shaheen, that you talked about in your opening statement. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jeremy. Let me just recognize Senators Coons, Booker, and Murphy, who just came. I'm glad we have more senators than we have room for, so we will just keep adding chairs. Thank you all very much. Sarah.
Thank you, Senator Shaheen and colleagues. As Jeremy said, the widespread support you're showing now and really over the last 3 weeks is very much felt by USAID staff and partners. USAID's work has long shown the best of America to the rest of the world. Today, the image that it shows is American abandonment. The administration's dismantling of USAID and abandonment of global staff and partners has devastated the world's poorest and undermined American security. This disaster, entirely of the administration's making, threatens to destabilize already fragile regions, jeopardizes American livelihoods, and weakens our national security. Immediate impacts include, in Sudan, where civil war rages, communal kitchens serving 800 people in Khartoum have ceased, while 1.6 million people in Darfur are cut off from water and sanitation. In Burkina Faso, where people have fled Islamists, 300 people in the besieged city of Djibo lack clean water. 57,000 civilians, many of them elderly, are now without heat or food on Ukraine's front lines. In northern Ethiopia, 700,000 people have been abruptly cut off from food and water, including 50,000 children cut off from emergency nutrition support. Each one of them someone's child. In Lebanon, as the new government struggles to shake Iranian and Hezbollah's influence, there is now no food assistance in the pipeline for more than 800,000 Syrian refugees. Globally, food aid meant for 31 million people sits stranded in ports from Houston to Nairobi. Despite Friday's waiver to move supplies, a waiver largely granted because of congressional outreach, funds for distribution remain frozen. In fact, as of yesterday, humanitarian partners have received no payment for completed work predating the stop work order, nor for activities meant to be continued under the humanitarian waiver. The domestic consequences are severe. USAID generates $3.3 billion in direct U.S. benefits. Even with the waiver, suspended food purchases threaten a $2 billion market for farmers across 19 states, from Kansas wheat to Georgia peanuts. Partner organizations have implemented mass layoffs, 11,000 Americans so far, with projected losses affecting 51,000 Americans across 43 states in the coming weeks. When Elon Musk fed USAID into the wood chipper, he critically damaged U.S. capabilities and influence. This past weekend, there was a magnitude 7.6 earthquake in the Caribbean basin. Had that earthquake just been 100 miles north and hit one of our neighbors, the U.S. government would have had no deployable urban search and rescue assets. When I led USAID's humanitarian operations, I saw firsthand how our response to disaster not only helped people in their moment of need, but advanced more hard security efforts by reopening, closing diplomatic and military channels following the earthquake in Turkey or devastating floods in Pakistan. Musk and the president have also made the assistance that will continue more susceptible to waste, fraud, and abuse. Before being fired yesterday, the USAID Inspector General warned that due to the administration's reckless actions, USAID's oversight mechanisms for humanitarian assistance are now largely offline. And USAID staff are often the few U.S. officials that have presence and relationships outside of elite capital circles. If allowed to withdraw staff from around the world, the president will withdraw American eyes and ears and sever critical relationships, creating a vacuum our adversaries are all too eager to fill. Finally, the president and Musk have broken a sacred trust with those that serve their country honorably. My former colleagues work around the clock and deploy into danger with little notice in service of their country. Over the last 3 weeks, they've been subject to vicious lies and conspiracy theories, propagated by their government and boosted by our adversaries. They've been cut off from critical comms in war zones and are facing unemployment. In an utterly predictable move, autocrats in Burma, Serbia, Georgia, El Salvador, Russia, and Hungary are using Musk and Trump's words to target USAID and their partners. Later this week, there will be a hearing on the House side entitled The Betrayal of USAID. There's certainly been a betrayal, but it's not by USAID.
Thank you, Sarah, and thank you all again for your testimony. Let me recognize Senator Duckworth, who just came in. We will open it up now for questions and statements in order of arrival. And because we don't have a timing system in here, I would ask if everyone could limit your questions. One question at a time. And we'll do as many rounds as people are willing to stay for and our panelists are willing to stay for. So, Senator Schatz, you go first.
Thank you. Thank you to all of the testifiers. Just a couple of quick points before my first and only question. The first thing I wanted to say is to USAID workers who have been laid off, who are being recalled, who are being punished, contractors, please, please, please hang in there. We are all working this day and night. There are a lot of people who are counting on you. I know how hard this is. I know how offensive this is. I know how economically and personally challenging this is. You are all patriots. We all have your back. That's number one. Number two is we're racing right into the impacts, and they are considerable. But I don't want us to jump right over the part where we talk about how this is illegal. We are not contemplating cuts within the four corners of the statute. We are not contemplating a new SFOPS mark that would reduce funding for some of these programs. We are observing a ransacking of an agency absolutely outside of the four corners of the statute, Foreign Assistance Act, and every appropriations bill subsequent to that, plus the Constitution of the United States. And I'm going to take a flyer because you're a former Assistant Attorney General. Mr. Schwarz, can you just elucidate exactly how illegal this is?
Well, thank you, Senator. I'm not sure I can elucidate exactly how illegal this is, but I think you've mentioned a number of the issues that have been raised and actually have been part of legal action that have been taken. The important point here that you make, Senator, is that this is money that Congress appropriated for this purpose, earmarked for this purpose, designated for this purpose, and did so, as I said in my opening statement, to protect the American people. And that money is not being spent at this time to protect any of the citizens of this country. And that, I think, is the fundamental issue. The legality, of course, will be a matter for the courts to decide. But right now, what is happening is the security gap that has been created by this action. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Schatz. I have Senator Kim and then Senator Kelly.
Thank you, Senator Shaheen. Thank you, all of you, for coming on out here. Some of you heard me say before that, my very first job working for the federal government was at USAID, and how proud I was to walk through the doors at the Ronald Reagan building, to be able to serve and to be able to go abroad and serve. And one thing that I always remembered that was the cornerstone of the saying of USAID was that it was from the American people. And that's what we put forward on the food assistance and so much else. But we're seeing the opposite of that. We're now going to see that people are saying, hey, look, this aid is taken away from, and it's because of, they're going to blame the American people. It's a reputational harm that is being done. So, Jeremy, I just wanted to, you to just hit home, for instance, on one of the largest aspects of this, and frankly, a very bipartisan aspect of this, which is PEPFAR. And I just wanted to ask you, how many people are currently on antiretroviral medication on PEPFAR globally? What is going to happen next? And to explain why the waiver that Secretary of State Marco Rubio talks about isn't going to actually be able to save a program that has enjoyed wide bipartisan support and something that has saved millions of lives.
Thank you, Senator. This is an extremely important point. So every day, in a normal day of the PEPFAR program, 222,333 people, on average, show up at a PEPFAR-funded clinic to pick up their antiretroviral drugs to keep their HIV infection suppressed. That's about 20 million people total around the world, 20 million people who depend on U.S. support and have long been able to rely on U.S. support in order to keep their infection suppressed, to be able to live their lives, and really critically, to not spread HIV to others, because when you are suppressed on ARV, you for the most part cannot spread the virus. That is now being disrupted. People are turning up to U.S.-supported clinics that they have gone to for years, sometimes for decades, and being turned away at the door because of the stop work order. The waiver that the Secretary issued has not translated, in most cases, into enabling those programs to begin. Even the few partners who have gotten letters saying that they can begin activities again, for the most part, have not been able to get funding to do so. So their funding remains frozen. They cannot access it through the payment system. And the result of this could be a significant increase in global HIV transmission. Someone can rebound, an infection can rebound in about a month if people are off consistent ARV accessibility. And a 3-month disruption to the program, much less a longer term or larger scale disruption to the program, would threaten the 20 million people who are on those ARVs. The UNAIDS, which is the UN agency for global HIV work, estimates that if PEPFAR were to disappear, there would be a 400% increase in HIV deaths over the next 4 years. 6.3 million people would die needlessly. 8.7 million people would become newly infected avoidably. Many of those would be children. There are excellent techniques for preventing mother-to-child transmission. Very, very effective. But obviously, to be effective, they have to be running. And if they're not running, more and more children will be preventably born with HIV. So these are the stakes.
Thank you. Senator Kelly.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. Mr. Charles, so about 40 years ago, as a midshipman at the U.S. Merchant Marine Academy, I got on a ship in Seattle, bound for Egypt with a full load of grain in bags, with a handshake on them, and it said something like goodwill from the United States. It was food assistance. Went to Egypt for a famine that was going on. I think it was in Ethiopia. And I've seen, even beyond that, some of the impact that these programs have. With my wife, Congresswoman Gabby Giffords, went to Western Africa, visited a refugee camp in the Congo, internally displaced people, where kids were starving, literally starving to death. I recently spoke with Cindy McCain, the head of the World Food Program, and in 2023, they provided assistance to 152 million starving people across 120 countries and territories. Contributions from USAID made up about 46% of her budget. So, Ms. Charles, first on, based on your experience at USAID, if you could just describe what it's like, if you have any kind of, knowledge of this, for a kid to die of starvation. And then, by the way, beyond that, in your experience, what does starvation do to regional stability? And what does it do to provide an opportunity for violent extremist organizations? How do they capitalize on this? So 3 questions in there.
So for any of you that have traveled to see USAID programs in action, you may have seen a nutrition center treating severely malnourished children. It is truly a horrific sight. Children, particularly susceptible to disease in environments with poor water and sanitation, maybe without access to vaccines, are particularly vulnerable to wasting, what we call the severest forms of malnutrition. It takes children quite quickly. Even those children who don't die can have permanent brain damage. But the miracle of malnutrition is it can be treated quite inexpensively and quite easily, largely with products that are produced using peanuts grown in the United States, produced in manufacturing facilities in Georgia and Rhode Island, highly nutritious food that are a gift from the American people to severely malnourished children around the world. We have seen time and time again U.S. foreign assistance save lives and transform lives, particularly for those children under 5 that are most vulnerable to disease and malnutrition. We have also seen how the absence of food and other forms of humanitarian assistance can be incredibly destabilizing. I spoke briefly, and I'm incredibly worried about Lebanon right now. We have a very narrow window in Lebanon, a fragile ceasefire with Israel, a new government that is making hard moves to separate from Iran. But Lebanon is hosting nearly 1 million Syrian refugees. So at a time when this administration has decided we're going to accept 0 refugees, we are also saying that we're going to cut off assistance from those countries that are hosting the largest numbers of refugees in the world.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Senator Rosen, then Van Hollen, and Klobuchar. Oops. Jackie left. Senator Van Hollen.
Thank you. I want to start by thanking Senator Shaheen for bringing us all together here. Really, the Senate Foreign Relations Committee should be having an emergency hearing on what's happening at the State Department and AID, and it's an abdication of the full committee's responsibility that they're not. As Senator Schatz pointed out, we've got law-breaking going on, and we're doing incredible harm to American interests around the world. Just a couple points on a question. I just want to reinforce what you've all have said about how our adversaries are quickly moving to exploit this reneging of American support around the world. One of Putin's cronies immediately tweeted out, "Good move at Elon Musk." You've got the headline in Politico that describes what's happening. USAID retreats, China pounces. This is the American retreat. The other thing that just is so disturbing is that people are maligning American patriots. The American people should be proud of what AID does on their behalf, as you're mentioning. And the patriots that work for AID deserve our great thanks. And I just would like you to take a moment, Jeremy, thank all of you for your testimony, but you focused on the outrageous lies and misinformation that have been spread. I know it's become quaint in our politics to, stick to the facts, but the fact checker that was done by the USAID says White House's wildly inaccurate claims about USAID spending, and goes on to list them all. And it doesn't even include the lie the press secretary said on our first day, which is that we spent $50 million on condoms in Gaza, which is just a lie. If this were a foreign government doing it, we would say this was a malign influence campaign. Can you just talk, Jeremy, about what is happening here with the president and Elon Musk spreading these massive lies, perpetrating this amazing fraud on the American people in order to dismantle this very important American institution?
Yeah, and it does in some ways resemble a malign foreign influence operation. The lies from, and I hardly want to repeat them, but lies about so-called $50 million worth of condoms going to Gaza, which, by the way, would be 1 billion condoms for 2 million people. Just to at least 1 billion. The U.S. pays about 4 to 5 cents per condom when it bulk purchases condoms through USAID for HIV programs. It's an absurd, when you say it that way, of course, it's absurd on its face, because it is absurd on its face. But it has been repeated by the President of the United States, and at one point he doubled it to 100 million. These sorts of lies are being used as the pretext to justify the destruction of the agency, to characterize the agency as something that, frankly, as someone who worked there for years over 2 administrations, I do not recognize the USAID that they are describing. And I would wager that most Republicans on the Hill do not recognize the USAID that they are describing. I have traveled overseas with Republican members of this chamber to disaster responses and to crises overseas. They know and they recognize the good work of USAID, as I know you all do. It is very telling, I think, that almost every single case that has come out of Elon Musk's mouth or from the White House, when it is examined, is false. The Gaza condom story is false. Some of the other instances, the so-called opera was not a USAID program, it was a State Department cultural diplomacy program. All of these examples that are being trotted out are not, in fact, USAID's work. So if the best that they can do to justify the destruction of the agency are a bunch of lies, I hope they will at some point reflect upon that. I was gratified yesterday that Elon Musk, when he was challenged on this in the White House, glibly admitted, oh yeah, okay, I got that one wrong. I'm gonna get things wrong once in a while. We should not allow the destruction of a major American institution and a major element of our foreign policy over this torrent of falsehoods.
Okay. Thank you, Senator Klobuchar, then Senator Coons and Booker.
Thank you very much, Senator Shaheen, and thank you for holding this spotlight hearing today. I was thinking about how much more enlightening it is than the hearing I had to go to this morning in Commerce that Senator Cruz had on buying Greenland, which is not for sale, and this seems much more realistic for a very real problem we're dealing with. I was just thinking, as Senator Van Hollen was talking, about how we bring our Republicans, so many of whom we work with all the time and respect, to the point where they're not acquiescing in this. Many of them care about national security, and they care about the issues. I know, I've worked with them, and you know, Mr. Schwarz, having served in a Republican administration, how important this is to many of them. So I was thinking, as I listened to you, the nutritious food that you talked about is grown by American farmers. And that's something that we have got to stress, the effect this is going to have economically at home if they cut this down. Number 2, the human trafficking argument, something that so many Republicans on the Judiciary Committee on which I serve, we have been in the lead on that domestically and internationally, and they should care about that. The third thing I was thinking was, Jeremy, about the Afghans, which is more related to some of the visa issues, but how so many Republicans are, Senator Graham and Senator Risch are with us on wanting to fix that problem, and now they're making it worse. These are Afghans that have served with our troops. And then the final thing that I'll ask about is just disease. And they don't want disease coming to our shores. And I was thinking about what I'd read about Ebola in Uganda and the fact that the Marburg virus is cropping up in Tanzania, and what are the impacts of halting U.S. support to partners to combat these diseases. I don't know which one of you want to, Jeremy, if you, or, yeah.
Yeah. I'll start with the disease point. So
You don't have to answer the other ones because we got one question. Just the disease.
I led the.
No, it's not. It was
a
one
very interesting
question.
question.
Disease.
So I led USAID's response to the Ebola outbreak in West Africa in 2014 and 15, and it was one of the most impressive, I think, feats of interagency cooperation in defense of U.S. security and safety that that I've seen in my career. Certainly, the USAID leading an effort that involved the CDC, the U.S. military, the U.S. Public Health Service. All working in lockstep to support 3 governments across that region to contain that incredibly damaging and deadly outbreak. We did that. We were able to do that as a government because of disaster response systems that Sarah knows well as well that evolved over many decades, and then in a unique, unusual crisis like that, could deploy rapidly and get that under control. If you contrast that to what's happening in Uganda today. And we are fortunate that Uganda is a very capable country with a capable health system, and that's fortunate because the U.S. is basically MIA on that outbreak right now. USAID is not able to deploy; it's not able to move money to partners. CDC is not allowed; it's under a gag order. They're not allowed to talk to partners, and of course, we've withdrawn from the World Health Organization, so no part of the U.S. government can talk to WHO, which in turn is the main entity that the Ugandan government is talking to. So we are very vulnerable. We are not deploying any of the normal tools that we would and could. Up until 3 weeks ago, we would have routinely had a robust USAID, CDC team out there partnering with WHO and the Ugandan government. Instead, we've basically abandoned that role, and I'm sure that has not gone unnoticed in Kampala.
Thank you. Senator Coons.
Thank you. This abrupt and total shutdown of U.S. foreign aid is inefficient, wasteful, harmful, illegal, and immoral. Over 15 years of service as a senator, I have visited exactly the programs each of you have spoken about. I have seen the work done by implementing partners and AID in combating criminal gangs, in pushing back on human trafficking, in dealing with global pandemics, and in responding to natural disasters at scale. This is not making America safer. It is not making us more respected. It is certainly not making us great again. And I am alarmed at the consequences. I fully expected after the election there would be a policy review and a realignment of priorities within state and AID. That happens after every election. But as the chair of the SFOP subcommittee that helped write the 2024 law, which is today being broken, I have over many years traveled with Republican senators to refugee camps, to PEPFAR sites, to programs pushing back on human trafficking and terrorism and extremism. And I'm clear who is celebrating this taking a chainsaw to U.S. foreign aid. It's cartels, it's extremists, it's China, it's chaos. And so my concern is whether or not this harmful impact across not just AID, but across household name NGOs that Americans support and contribute to is recoverable. Because days and now weeks after the shutdown, we're at the point where despite the secretary signing waiver after waiver, the money isn't starting again. There is, because the most senior people at AID here at headquarters and in the field are either shut down or shut out, no money flowing. And as a result, the heads of the major NGOs that are partners are laying off people here in the United States and around the world, shutting down and canceling programs. We are losing decades of experience and insight, deep relationships, effective interventions in some of the most dangerous and distant places on earth, and we are betraying partners who have risked their place in their communities and countries by publicly aligning with us. I'd be interested in any of you saying, do you think this is recoverable? Because there's a divide between those in this Congress and the administration who say, shut it all down. I think someone said he was proud of putting it through a wood chipper and called it a criminal enterprise. and those who say, wait, we wanted a reform, we wanted a pause, we wanted to squeeze out some of the woke, but we support PEPFAR and the work against malaria and tuberculosis. The United States should be able to respond to a global humanitarian crisis, which the State Department can't. We should still be strong in combating cartels and human trafficking, and we should still fight for democracy and rule of law. But the hour is late, and if these funds are not turned back on, the layoffs and the shutdowns will be permanent. The silence will be yawning, millions of lives will be lost, our credibility will have been shredded, and we will have betrayed people around the world who counted on us. Can this be recovered?
I think we have a narrow but very closing window to save the institution and, more important, the capacities that protect U.S. national interest. There is no reason why a review of foreign assistance requires withdrawing staff from around the world, shuttering missions, removing the name of the agency from the Ronald Reagan building and turning over the lease to Customs and Border Patrol. These are all actions meant to create facts on the ground that make it harder to claw back those capacities. But it does feel like there's a narrow, but again, closing window.
Thank you, Sarah.
And similarly, I think that you make such a good point, Senator, that, trust takes a long time to gain, but a short time to lose. And I do think that the longer it takes for us to sort of right this ship, the longer it'll take us to regain our position, but I do think that it is possible. And I also think, I worked at the local level before I did anything. I never left the country until I was 30. So I was a prosecutor in Dallas, Texas, and I think that the folks that I worked with in Dallas and the American people expect that our government leaders can engage in a careful review of programs and clarify objectives and maybe even cull some opportunities, but do so without inflicting cruelty and chaos. They should expect that we can do those things without inflicting cruelty and chaos. I really think we can do better.
And Senator, I would add on the law enforcement and national security side, of course, the withdrawal of these funds, the freezing of these funds, creates trust issues with our partners, particularly people in foreign law enforcement agencies who've put their lives on the line to work with us. It may be recoverable, but in the interim, we are vulnerable every single day that we are not engaging in the counterterrorism and counter-narcotics and cyber crime activities that we had funding for from Congress.
Thank.
No, that's fine. I agree with
Do you want to add?
The short version is I agree with Sarah. I think the damage right now is reputational, but it's about to become structural, and we have a narrow window before that occurs.
Thank you all, and thank you for your work around the world in so many different ways over so many years. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Senator Duckworth.
Thank you, Chairwoman. Well, I just want to start off by quickly summarizing. I think three main points have been made today very clearly by the panel. Number one, this decision to halt U.S. foreign assistance and the slapdash way that it's been executed puts our national security at risk. Number two, the people who are winning here are our adversaries. That's who's winning, whether that's a PRC or Russia stepping in to fill the leadership vacuum that Trump created, or Elon Musk and his cronies, who clearly got some kind of personal satisfaction out of all this destruction. Never mind that real people's lives and livelihoods are at stake. And number three, Americans are not only less secure as a result of these destructive actions, but our economic security is also put at risk. We've already talked a little bit about how U.S. farmers feed into the supply chain for this kind of emergency food assistance. So I want to move on to my question, which has to do with human trafficking. And Ambassador Dyer, from your experience addressing trafficking in persons, can you speak to how forced labor affects IUU fishing and farming practices, impacting how American farmers and fishermen can compete fairly on the world stage?
Thank you, Senator, for that question. And IUU fishing is a very big problem. We know that fishermen, especially on some of these long-distant vessels, are very vulnerable to forced labor. And what we know for sure is that when companies do not pay their fishermen and do not pay the processors who process those fish, it is not possible for American companies to compete. We can't compete when other people use forced labor. And I think that an excellent example we know is in in Vietnam and in India with the shrimp industry. We have workers who are catching shrimp and processing shrimp not being paid appropriately. Frequently, that is then falsely labeled as Gulf shrimp. And how can our shrimpers in Texas and Louisiana compete when other people don't pay their workers? And I think that's such an excellent example of how these programs to focus on worker rights in other countries absolutely improve American workers and American companies.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Senator Duckworth. We promised that we would wrap up by about 5 o'clock. It's almost 5, but I have a question, and I haven't yet asked my one question, so I will get to do that. Mr. Schwarz, you referenced this in your comments, but you played critical roles in extraditing Mexican drug lord El Chapo, in navigating relations with Central America's Northern Triangle countries. And I wonder if you could elaborate further on how this funding stop work order, because it's more than a freeze, has affected our ability to address this administration's own priorities for debilitating Mexican drug cartels and stemming irregular migration to the southern border.
Well, thank you, Senator. I think there are really three ways in which there's an impact here. The first is the most general way in which my colleagues have pointed out. The view of the United States is critical in ways I think that many people that don't deal in the law enforcement world don't understand. Foreign prosecutors, foreign agents don't necessarily have to cooperate with us. It's a matter of trust. It's a matter of building long-term relationships. It's a matter of how the United States is perceived and its trustworthiness. So even programs that USAID and state do that don't have any direct law enforcement aspects have influence on what will happen with regard to law enforcement. The second way in which it's highly relevant is the actual hard power funding that Congress gives us for foreign assistance funding in this regard. So in Mexico, in Latin America, the DEA's and Homeland Security's vetted teams, these are the Mexican, other Latin American law enforcement agents who are selected, they're polygraphed, they're checked. That's all made possible by foreign assistance funding. As in addition, the judicial wiretap interception programs, that's funded by foreign assistance funding. Helicopters for narcotics interdiction, all funded by foreign assistance funding. Our prosecutors that work in these countries to help the foreign prosecutors develop their counter-narcotics cases, that's foreign assistance funding. So with that not being there, that activity is highly damaged. It simply is not taking place in the same way that it otherwise would. And that's money that is designed as a real instrument of hard power. We talk about foreign assistance as soft power, but it's hard power as well when it comes down to it. And then the third way, as you have mentioned, my colleagues have mentioned, is the instability that the lack of assistance creates and the driving factor that creates for exactly the kind of migration that we are trying to stem. So in all of these ways, the dynamic is such that foreign assistance funding can help stem the threats to the United States, but the lack of that funding can actually increase our vulnerability.
Well, thank you very much for that response, and thank you to each of you for your testimony. I hope if anybody's got testimony that's written, you will share that with us, because there were a lot of good statistics and information that I think would be helpful for our colleagues. So we very much appreciate your willingness to weigh in today and your continued efforts to ensure that we do a better job with addressing the foreign assistance challenges that we face, and we get these programs back up and running as soon as possible. So thank you. Thank you to all the senators who came today, to all of you in the audience, and thank you to the staff of the Foreign Relations Committee Minority for all of your hard work. Thank you, everybody.